Arcane is done, at least in its current iteration. The final act of season 2 is now on Netflix, and that means that the show in this form is complete. And you, viewer, are likely here because you really liked Arcane, with good cause. It's a very, very good show, and want more, and want to know how to get more. And I have been there. That's exactly how I got into Runeterra's IP after season 1. So today we're going to talk about how you can get more of a taste of Runeterra, the world that Arcane is set in. I'm going to give you a bunch of different ways that you can use based on your own tastes across games and short stories and books. And I'm going to tell you what I think you should engage with to start and what you should maybe hold off on. Big warning ahead of time, this video is going to spoil some things about Arcane. We're going to talk about various parts of the show, and we're also going to talk about information that's been revealed in interviews after the show's end. So if you haven't watched Arcane, do that before you watch this video. Also, if you find this video helpful, something like 95% of you aren't subscribed. Liking and subscribing helps the channel a ton. Leaving a comment also helps. You can write whatever you want down there, good, bad. You can write papaya for all I care. It doesn't matter. Any engagement really helps me with the algorithm. Enough plugging. I've got timestamps for specific things, so you can skip around if you like. But if we're going to talk about what I think you should read or play next, we're going to need to talk a little bit about Runeterra itself to start. Something that you need to understand about Arcane and Runeterra is that the canon, the one true timeline, is up for discussion right now. It's in flux. It's a little volatile. League of Legends has had its own canon for a while now, usually based around the champions. And when Arcane was originally conceived, it wasn't meant to be main canon. It was going to be a side story, an alternate universe type of situation. But then it turned out Arcane was very, very good and very, very successful. And it's not good for a very easy, very popular entry to your IP to not actually be relevant to the overall IP. So the plan changed, and Riot has since decided that they're merging Arcane and League of Legends and Legends of Runeterra and all their other games and stories into one unified lore. Now, why is that important? It's important because there are specific differences between what's portrayed in Arcane and what was portrayed in the old lore. And that means that when you're engaging with the material that currently exists for Runeterra, you need to keep in mind that 1, things could change in the future because the current state is very malleable and shapeable, and 2, some things just actively don't apply anymore or are still in a very nebulous state. One advantage that we have right now is that because Arcane focuses really on 1.5/2 specific regions, we can go around and look at other areas that are less likely to be changed in the near-term future. This is also bolstered by the fact that post-Act 3, Necrit, the preeminent lore master for Runeterra on YouTube, did an interview with Arcane co-creator Christian Link, aka Riot Preco. And in that interview, we got some detail on what 3 regions Riot is looking at to potentially target next for a show. That full interview is linked in the description. If you're somebody that likes Runeterra lore, it's definitely worth going and watching the full video. Necrit asked some really good questions, and we got some really cool answers out of it. Just go watch the whole thing. It's also important to signal to Riot writ large that these kind of lore interviews matter. Anyways, because of that, we also know 3 regions that could potentially be getting lore changes very quickly. But to talk about that and to finally get into what you should consume next, we do need to do a little geography lesson. Okay, to start, here's a map of most of known Runeterra. We'll get to the most in a second. Coming from Arcane, you're going to be already familiar with 2 regions. The first is Piltover and Zaun, the location that houses Arcane. You're going to be very familiar with this already, it's the setting for all of the show. The second is Noxus, the empire that Ambessa, her forces, and the Black Rose are repping in Arcane. That's this very large empire to the north. There are several other regions in Runeterra that all have various champions, stories, and content associated with them. On the northern continent of Valoran, we have the Freljord, a frozen tundra-like section of land with spirit gods and a few different primary tribes at odds with one another, and Demacia, a nation to the west of Noxus, and with a pretty antagonistic relationship because they, don't want to be a part of Noxus. Demacia has a, let's say, turbulent relationship with mages and magic. This nation was founded in the wake of the Rune Wars that LeBlanc, who was not actually named in Arcane but was shown, mentioned in the final episode of Season 2, where the calamity of magical war was so great that these people ran west until they found a forest full of magic-absorbing trees and founded an anti-magic nation. To the east of Noxus, on its own island, we have Ionia, a nation that embodies harmony with the natural world and magic in the spirit realm. There are a set of provinces that all work and interoperate with one another, they've got monastic orders, and it's just generally a very nature-y place. Moving just a little south on the map, almost directly east of Piltover and Zaun, we get Bilgewater and the Serpent Isles, my personal favorite region as a pirate lover. You could best describe Bilgewater as like Runeterra Tortuga. It's the pirate and seafaring capital of Runeterra, due in no small part to its proximity to Piltover and Zaun's sea channel, because, as a reminder, Piltover and Zaun are very important to trade in Runeterra. Bilgewater itself is situated on the Serpent Isles, which are home to the Buru people, a culture that heavily revolves around the worship of the sea goddess Nagakaboros. Stop! I can see you typing the comment. No matter how I say this word, somebody comes at me in the comments saying that I said it wrong. The pronunciation is not consistent across Riot's products.
You live as Nagakaboros intends. Good.
Nagakaboros surrounds us.
Still type your comment though, because engagement is engagement. Very slightly southwest of that is the continent of Shurima that houses, let's say 3.5 distinct regions. Furthest west we have Targon, home of Mount Targon, which is a giant mountain that reaches up to the heavens and acts as a conduit for celestial forces and communication in Runeterra. In the middle, the vast majority of the continent, is the region of Shurima, a mostly desert region that once housed the powerful Shuriman Empire, which is now a ghost of what it used to be. The half of a region is the region of Acathia to the south, which during the reign of the Shuriman Empire rebelled against the Empire, turned to the Void, and ended up a void-consumed wasteland. And finally, on the eastern coast, we have Ishtal, a very ancient region in Runeterra that houses masters of elemental magic and has self-isolated itself from the conflicts in other regions of Runeterra for a very, very, very long time. The last region on this map is the Shadow Isles, formerly known as Helia, the Blessed Isles. Once a center of magical education and excellence in Runeterra, shattered by calamity, and now an undead spectral nightmare. It's worth noting that the story of the Shadow Isles also ties closely to a region that is not shown on this map, but located east, the ancient kingdom of Camavor. We do have this map from a novel that we're going to talk about in a minute that shows us the independent lands in Camavor specifically. These independent lands also have another nation that we know a little bit about named Cathcan. That won't come up a ton, but it's worth knowing about. There's also a hidden area known as Bandle City, which exists in the spirit realm, so outside the material realm of Runeterra, and is home to the Yordle race. I'm not really going to talk about Bandle City in this video, but it's worth knowing where the Yordles come from. That's your map overview, and I wanted to give you that because in the aforementioned Necrit interview, Christian Link confirmed that the next 3 regions the team is looking at are Demacia, Noxus, and Ionia. The chief reason that I think this matters is that whichever region they pick is, in my eyes, the most likely to receive significant changes next. Everything is on the not the chopping block, but like it's a shaping block. Everything is on a shaping block, but whichever of those regions gets picked is most likely to see a swath of lore changes. And between that knowledge and Arcane, I think it divides the regions of Runeterra into sort of like most likely to become convoluted, probably about to become convoluted, and least likely to have the information you're about to consume become outdated rapidly. So that's how we're going to frame our media consumption. But let's start with a big one. Should you play League of Legends? I got a text message from somebody while I was writing the script for this video about this very subject, and I struggled with this section because I had the opportunity to save lives. But here's what I'm going to say about playing and installing League. League of Legends is an incredible game. There is a reason it's been around so long. It's fun, it's rewarding, it's got a ton of room for skill expression. It has a casual mode called ARAM, stands for all random, all mid, that you can play for a more relaxing experience. You can just do bot games. There's a lot to love about League. But if you're here, you probably fell in love with the story and world of Arcane and Runeterra. And traditionally, League proper has not been the strongest vector that Riot has for those kinds of stories and world building. They've done it. They've done big lore events before, like Burning Tides, or for better or worse, the Sentinels of Light. It has flavor text and mini games and voice lines and stuff to pull lore from. I'm just saying there have been stronger vectors. But I think that's about to change with the announcement of how 2025 is going to handle seasons and narrative around those seasons, starting with Noxus. And Riot Meddler talking about it on Reddit and invoking Sentinels of Light and saying, like that, but with like cleaner execution, maybe. So this might be a little copium, but we might be on the cusp of like good narrative drive in the League client itself, which is really exciting. I do ultimately think that people should try League, but more so to figure out if you like that style of game. I would not say that you liking Arcane means you're going to like League of Legends just because they're very different products. It's also worth noting that there's like 169 champions in League right now, so there's a learning curve to playing League of Legends. Wild Rift on phones actually has less champions and a little bit less of a learning curve, and the matches are faster. I know it's on mobile, so it's a mobile game, but I actually really like Wild Rift. So maybe consider giving that a go as well. Teamfight Tactics, the auto chess game, also lives in the League client. That's actually probably how I spend most of my time in the League client. It's also got a mobile version as well, so if auto chess is more your speed, maybe give that a go. But before we get to my actual story recommendations, I do want to talk about one more product. Legends of Runeterra is Riot's card game, and it is woefully slept on. It is a well thought out digital TCG with extremely reasonable card acquisition relative to other TCGs, single player PvE, PvP, and most importantly to me, is an incredible source of world building for Runeterra. I have long espoused that as a creator, I am more focused on sort of the world setting of Runeterra and its regions, and less so on specific characters, and so LOR is a feast for me. Almost all of the great detail in Legends of Runeterra is in card art and flavor text, but there's so much of it. And what I noted about Seasons for League has been mentioned as tying across products to some extent, so I'm holding out hope that there might be some nice narrative pieces in LOR next year as well. Fingers crossed. Do not sleep on Legends of Runeterra. Truly a great game. Those are Riot's own heavy hitters, and with that, all of my preamble is out of the way. If you enjoyed Arcane, I think there are some great stories to be told via some specific games and short stories and novels. Stories that have a limited risk of getting severely retconned in the near-term future, and stories that you can go explore right now. Let's get into the first bundle. I'm calling this the Ruined King Saga because there are two different key pieces of media in two different mediums that I think are good to explore as part of this story. They also happen to be two of my favorite things in the Runeterra IP right now. The first is the game Ruined King, a League of Legends story. I'm starting with recommending this because, as I mentioned before, there are certain regions that are less impacted by Arcane and less likely to be impacted by future shows. This game covers Bilgewater and the Shadow Isles for regions, which keeps it clear of Piltover and Zaun, Demacia, Noxus, and Ionia, although there are characters from across all of Runeterra who feature in the game. It's a top-down, story-driven RPG with good exploration, a good mainline story, tons of side quests, and tons of lore details to be found, and a really fun take on turn-based combat that utilizes a lane system to make abilities faster but weaker, or slower but stronger. It was the first of a now defunct series of Riot Forge games, where Riot partnered with external developers to make games in the Runeterra IP, but even with that project shut down, it still provides a lot of cool Runeterra world building that I think, / hope, will remain relevant. I'm going to try my best to not spoil this game, but I don't think it's a spoiler, considering he's on the cover art, to mention that this game features heavily around Viego, who you learn from the intro cinematic to the game was tragically cursed in the same magical calamity that turned Helia the Blessed Isles into the Shadow Isles. That tragedy, and Viego's own backstory, as well as just world-building details about Camivore, can all be found in a novel called Ruination that can be sort of treated as a soft prequel to this game. It's not a true prequel to the game, but it is a very well-written novel from late 2022 that covers Viego's time in power and how events eventually converged to turn the Blessed Isles into the Shadow Isles. It's a very good read, particularly if you like the Runeterra setting, and because of its disconnection from the mainland map, as well as its publication date, I think it's very unlikely to get suddenly retconned in the future. Additionally, on Riot's own universe page, linked in the description, there are short stories to specific champs and regions that are worth reading. Some of them are very, very good. Two that are in particular worth reading, in the case of this Ruined King package, are Burning Tides and Shadow and Fortune. Also both linked in the description. It'll probably take you like an hour to read through both of those. They give you a good backstory on Bilgewater and one of the game's primary protagonists, Misfortune. As a side note, if you're not interested in playing Ruined King but you want to know the story, I've decided a new side project I'm going to do is go replay that game on stream. I haven't played that since it came out, and it's high time that I went back to it. So I'm going to try and stream about once a week here and on Twitch and just play through that game with all of you. Something to check out if you have time. You can always follow me on Blue Sky or Twitter or either of those platforms to make sure you know when I'm going live if you want to come hang out and check it out. Okay, next package. Another story entry from a region that Riot has not specifically called out as being a focus is Son of Nunu, another Riot Forge project. This one is set in the Freljord, the cold nation that I mentioned in the map section, and tracks the story of Nunu and Willem, an orphan from the Freljord and his Yeti companion. It's a third-person action platformer with puzzles and exploration and a lot of lore strewn about. You get an introduction to some of the spirit gods that permeate the religious beliefs of the Freljord, experience with Freljordian champions and the tribes, an introduction to Lysandra and the Void. There's actually a surprising amount packed into this. And if you pair it with a few key universe writings, Legend of the Frozen Watchers, Eye in the Abyss, The Dream Thief, and the Ash comic War Mother, you get a pretty good introduction to the region of the Freljord overall. I will link all of those stories in the description as well under the Freljord Stories header, so you can find all of them very easily. Those are two tangible packages where you can play something to really get more Runeterra story in front of you. There's one more of those in particular that I want to mention, but before I do, it's worth noting that the aforementioned League of Legends universe page has tons of short stories for every champion and region. If you bear in mind what I said earlier, which is that Piltover and Zaun is very much in flux right now, and Noxus, Demacia, and Ionia could potentially be on the block next, you can kind of just pick a region and go read those stories if you want. That was my own journey. I just started with Bilgewater and then kind of like went down a rabbit hole when I was learning about the world. Now, I want to touch briefly on the 3 nations that they specifically called out as being the next focus for television exploration. Because even though I think they're more likely to receive changes, I still think there are things worth going and learning about for those regions. If you remember from earlier, Demacia is the nation that was founded post-Rune Wars and that I described as having a turbulent relationship with magic. For a long time, one of Demacia's key defining characteristics was the mistreatment of mages. People born with magical abilities were basically told to like register themselves and work for the government or go to prison. Not ideal. You can read stuff like Demacian Heart or For Demacia on the universe page, but a good, succinct way to get caught up on the story of Demacia in my eyes is to read the Lux comic. This comic is a story about the League champion Lux, but also touches heavily on Silas, who ends up going on to lead the Mage Rebellion in Demacia. Then, once you finish that, you can play Mageseekers, a pixel art action game with a really cool spell stealing mechanic where you play as Silas, and you help drive Demacia's core plot forward, which will catch you up to where it's currently at. There's a chance details of this could change in the future, but on nothing more than a gut feeling, I bet it stays relatively the same, the bones of it anyways. Another tie-in for Mageseekers is the Katarina comic, which was a prequel to the game and sometimes happens at the same time as the Lux comic, and more importantly ties Demacia to a region that Arcane viewers are very familiar with, Noxus. Noxus is a brutal, warmongering empire with the stated goal of uniting all of Runeterra under a common banner. They have a history that includes an immortal warlord known as Mordekaiser, and a secret society known as the Black Rose that's responsible for puppeteering events across Runeterra and within the empire itself. I think Noxus is the region that is most likely to get lore changes in the near-term future. But, somewhat luckily, I think we're actually going to learn what those changes look like very soon. You see, in addition to getting a glimpse into Noxus via Arcane, Riot has already announced a novel coming in February 2025 called Ambessa. This novel is going to cover Ambessa's story, and I think we're going to get a good glimpse into Noxus as a result. And more importantly, we might glean some information about where on this new timeline we are sitting, which will then help us figure out what may or may not change about lore later on. In addition to that, the first season of next year for League of Legends is themed around Welcome to Noxus. And if they make good on their thematic and world building talk, that's also going to give us a glimpse to Noxus. If you really can't wait until then to sink your teeth into Noxus, I'd read Principles of Strength probably on the universe page, and then maybe also like Thorns of a Black Rose as starting points. The latter deals with LeBlanc, who again is not named but is portrayed in Season 2 of Arcane. A big defining moment for Noxus's history in the previous canon was the invasion of Ionia. That war had devastating effects on both sides and rippling effects across Runeterra, but it's not super clear when that war happened now in a post-Arcane world, as there are conflicts with the timelines of certain champions seen and teased in Arcane versus where it's implied Noxus is at in its political hierarchy history. For that reason, both Noxus and Ionia, I feel, are the most likely candidates to have their histories modified. But I think you can go still read stories about Ionia to get started. Rakan and Xayah stories I both liked quite a bit. The Zed comic also deals with some of the inner politics of various Ionia factions and champions in the wake of the Noxian invasion. Ionia has a lot of really cool history, and includes the origins of the Vastaya Shirei, a race who would eventually intermingle with humans and create the anthropomorphic tribes of Vastaya that you can see scattered across Runeterra, including in Arcane. There are other experiences you can have as well. While it's super not canon, if you really like Piltover and Zaun, the game Convergence centers on Echo and is a ton of fun to play, and you can still get a feel for the world of Zaun from it, even if the details aren't necessarily going to be relevant anymore. I've also heard good things about Bandle City, but admittedly, I haven't played it. Maybe I should do that. Hopefully this video has given you some good starting points to jump into other Runeterra stories. I truly believe that if you enjoyed Arcane, there are a ton of good ways to get more of that world in front of you, even in the face of some of the details of that world changing. And with what it sounds like Riot has in store for us in 2025 and beyond, I'm pretty optimistic about the future. If you're already a big Runeterra IP person and you have something about the world of Runeterra that you really like that I didn't mention, please drop it in the comments below for all of the people that are just getting into this world for the first time. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Okay, bye.